Would you let Nick Fuentes back on?
Yes.
Absolutely. A white supremacist anti-Semite?
Yeah, as long as he doesn't break the rules.
Well, those are breaking the rules.
No, having views, having thoughts in your head is not against the law.
What about
or
saying
breaking the rules
on his show?
If you say things on the platform that violate the platform,
and if you
rules,
promote your show and you say them on your show,
well,
if I started spewing white supremacist stuff now in front of you, right, and I then tweeted a link to the show, you'd be happy with that?
Zuby.
I'm not saying I would be happy with it, but I wouldn't want you banned from X for that.
Oh. Really? So I could look down the barrel of this camera and say, I think all black people should be thrown out of this country.
Watch how they clip this one.
Well, no.
Zuby knows how the internet works. Pierce, it's a crazy thing. I would like to know who espouses those views. That's the beauty of freedom of speech.
Okay, so someone will clip it, right? And I could say that.
Yes.
And then I could tweet a link to this show to promote the show.
Yes.
And you would think I should stay on X.
Yes, I would support your right to free speech.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
That's not free speech, it's hate speech.
No, it's free.
Hate speech. I mean, I know Pierce is approaching this discussion from the British perspective, much like a Canadian might be approaching it from the Canadian perspective. Hate speech, it's not bloody recognized under the First Amendment as a restrictive method, Pierce.
Freedom of speech specifically exists to protect views and people espousing views.
But there are 6 different criteria excluded under the First Amendment.
Not one of which is hate speech, Pierce. This is where you might have got. There's defamation, incitement, criminal discourse, criminal activity. Fraud. There are 6 carved out criteria. In America, one of them is not hate speech. Imagine saying immigrant go home, in as much as it's unpopular to say, becomes hate speech worthy of being unbanned. So when people tell Piers Morgan to go home because nobody needs his censorship and anti-Second Amendment perspective in America, that would be hate speech. Ban them from Twitter, and so that nobody can tell Piers Morgan to go home because of his un-American views. And I'm not saying this, by the way, but I'd like to know who would be saying it if people were saying it about me. Go back to Canada, Viva, is what they'd be saying.
Including child pornography, including defamation, including all sorts of things. You can't famously go into a theatre and shout fire.
Including all sorts of things, but not hate speech, Pierce.
Crowded theatre, right?
Sure, but you can say
so there are lots of restrictions already.
Look, there are people who think that I engage in hate speech. There's people who think that you engage in hate speech. Hate speech is a very subjective, it's an extraordinarily subjective term. And if anyone who has ever said anything
so for you, there's no
decades,
limits. Anyone can say anything.
I don't think you can directly call to violence.
It's an amazing thing. Hate speech is very subjective. So anyone can say anything. No, Pierce, we already established that. My goodness, Zuby's doing good.
Right.
No.
Anyhow, all that's to say, shout out to Zuby for not keeping his composure. It's not like he was under attack. It is very easy to get distracted and flustered when you're on a platform as big as Piers Morgan, having that talk over you. I thought that was a great clip to start with because it might be relevant for today's discussion. I don't know if we're going to get in trouble for talking about the George Floyd situation. But before we do, let's just make sure that we're live everywhere. I was glitching on StreamYards. I was trying to say and put in the chat, went for a jog this morning in the rain. It's beautiful. It would not let me send that message 4 times. An error occurred. Wait a moment and try again. Then I do mic check and the mic check goes through. Then I put in, went for a jog in the rain this morning. It was beautiful. An error occurred. Wait. And then we're back to chat. So let's make sure that we're live everywhere before we get into this, because I hesitated on the thumbnail and the caption or the title to describe this. I don't want to be accused of clickbait. I don't want to be accused of anything that would impugn what I pride myself on, my integrity. And I ran the title by our guest, and he says, I'm going to pronounce his name the way the French do, Jean Beaudoin, although it's John Beaudoin. I don't want to mischaracterize what we're going to discuss today. I don't want to oversell it. I don't want to, make it what it's not, and I don't want anyone saying clickbait, exploitive rubbish. You're going to meet John Beaudoin Sr., and we're going to talk about what he says he's discovered and what he believes is a strong indication that George Floyd's death certificate was modified to conceal what was the initial indication of cause of death. Now, when someone else is out there saying, I question the official narrative, lawsuits, defamation, whatever it is, hate speech. You can't do that. You can't question the narrative without getting deplatformed, sanctions. It doesn't matter. We're doing it today. And what I was going to say is that for those of you who don't know me, Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned Florida rumbler. When I go a day without streaming or making a vlog, I feel like I have not accomplished anything. Even though technically I might have accomplished 10 other items which are equally, if not more important. A day without streaming, a day without video, a day without, communicating with the world feels like a day lost. Although I did communicate with our locals community, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. We're going to catch up and we got some news. So what we're going to do today, we have a guest, John Beaudoin, Sr. You might know him from his research and work on the COVID question, COVID stats, COVID data. You're going to know him based on what we're going to talk about today. A little bit of that, George Floyd. After the interview, I'm going to continue on Rumble. So about 45, 50 minutes in, we're going to end on YouTube and Rumble and go over exclusively to Rumble. If you're watching on vivabarneslaw.locals.com, am I good there? Are we good here? We are good here. Then we're going to have our after party on vivabarneslaw.locals.com. So that's the order for the day. Shall we get going? 6 minutes in? Good. Monsieur Beaudoin, est-ce que vous êtes prêt, monsieur? That's French for are you ready? He's ready. Okay, I'm bringing him in. 3, 2, 1. John, sir, how goes the battle?
Oh, going very well, actually. Winning on all fronts. So I appreciate the pronunciation of my name. And I will say, je ne parle pas français, mon père did not teach me.
Beaudoin, for those of you who don't, might have surmised, it is definitively of French origin, but there's a lot of, many multi-generational who have a French name, last name, who don't speak French, much like I have Freiheit as a last name, but I don't speak German. Although in Yiddish, it means the same thing, freedom, in all Germanic languages. John, there's going to be a lot of people, I suspect, who might be watching now who have no idea who you are. There's going to be a lot who do because you've been a pivotal, but not necessarily the what do they call them? The headline name in the COVID research battle that has been ongoing. Many people are going to know who you are, but for those who don't, let's do the 30,000-foot overview. We're not going to delve into too much history today, maybe some, before we get into the present, but who are you?
Well, I'm 59, so I was born in 64. It gives a relative view of how I grew up and when I grew up. So you had the Vietnam War ending as I was a child, growing up in the 70s. And then got into some trouble as a kid, nothing major, just as kids do. The boys, we used to run around free. Now everybody's kind of locked up and on their electronic devices. And then I found school somehow. I thought it was cool to get A's. So I did really well in high school. I got a full scholarship, became an engineer. And then I didn't like that. So I ended up in sales. So my career is large contract sales, very strategic, big deal. I'll just say the guidance control system for the Trident nuclear missile, the Polaris missile that pops out of submarines. I put together the deal for all the design software for that. It's netted over $1 billion, and it spanned Raytheon, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Honeywell, and the prime contractor was Draper Laboratory in Cambridge, where MIT is. So my career was really high-tech conversations where I had to translate among financial people, legal and contracts people, really super bright engineers doing crazy designs. So I just communicate well. And then I raised a family, raised 3 boys on my own. I divorced a long time ago, full custody for years. And when COVID hit, I'll just tell your audience, I had lost my son a few years before COVID in a motorcycle accident. And so I sat on the couch depressed. And when COVID hit, my middle son said, "This is all BS." I was like, "No, you got to take it seriously, Charlie. People are dying." So I looked into the data. I wanted to be a good dad. And I found out they were lying about a lot of stuff. They changed the file. When I looked at it, I wrote to the CDC. I said, "You have some math errors in your 2014 through 2018 data." And when they wrote, they didn't write back. They took the file down for 36 hours. When they put it back up, they changed the data. They changed historical data to meet the narrative they were pushing in 2020. I can't prove any of it, but I know it happened to me, and that set me off. And
oh, sorry. So when you say you can't prove it because you didn't have screen grabs before and after, but you know that you saw it with your, it's the
Exactly.
it's the gaslighting, like the memory holding. If you don't screen grab it, you don't have a record of it, but you know it happened, and people will think you're crazy. I don't think anyone's going to think you're crazy, though. We've seen how they've deleted and stealth edited in real time to fit the narrative. So you get heavily involved in just COVID research and tracking the data with your interest, obsession, and area of expertise.
Yes. I actually went to law school for a year at 56 years old. And before I went a day to the school, I said, I'm not taking any vaccine by email. And they wrote back, don't worry, you're over 30. You don't have to take a vaccine. So that incorporates as part of the contract as an inducement, right? I go for a year and then they say, we have a vaccine mandate, and they throw me out. So now I have a lawsuit against the school. I have a lawsuit against the governor in federal court for deprivation of rights. I've got a lot of stuff going on, but
right now.
yeah.
I'm the chat said I'm a little low. I've upped my volume a little bit, so we're going to see if this is better now. I don't know that we need to get into the COVID stuff, although it might be incidental to, it will incidentally touch on what's going on here. So you get heavily involved in that world of the interwebs for COVID, with the likes of Jessica Rose, and a number of the other experts who were analyzing the data, identifying weaknesses in the data, and calling out the people on it. And you've established quite I say in the milieu, a very, very respectable reputation for having done that. And that might be a subject for another day entirely, but so how does it get into George Floyd, and what is your business in looking into George Floyd?
Well, first of all, I don't even want to talk about this, but it needs to be talked about because the truth is just so important to me. And there are personal reasons. I've had signs from God, if you will. So I have, through public records request, all the Massachusetts death certificates for the last 9 years. Somebody else got them from Minnesota. And so after a year of analyzing Massachusetts, that person, and she wants to remain anonymous, alerted me that they had them. And then another guy in New York City, and I started analyzing those as well.
If I may, I might interrupt you. I'm going to not do it too often just to get clarification on points. So you have 9 years of death certificate data from Massachusetts.
Yes, and now Minnesota.
And you had this because that was part of what you were looking into for the COVID deaths, to track pre-COVID, post-COVID, I presume, right?
That's correct. The news said that a 7-year-old girl died from COVID. And I thought, for everything I know, there's no way a healthy 7-year-old dies from COVID. So I got the death certificate, and it actually said she died of COVID. But then I found another record. She reacted to the vaccine in 5 minutes, vomited for 8 to 10 hours. They waited a couple of weeks, gave her another vaccine. She had stomach pain. She was dead in 4 days. And on her death certificate, they wrote COVID. It's the only thing they wrote in part 1. So there's massive amount of fraud being committed by Massachusetts on official death records. And that's what set me off to do all the analyses.
Is the name of that 7-year-old girl public? I don't want to violate any privacy.
Yeah, I've said it many times. In Massachusetts law, I can say it. Her name is Cassidy. And if you look at anything I've done, you can find the records. It's also the first chapter in my book is named Cassidy.
It's similar to Trista Martin, the family about who daughter passed away after the jab. Sean Hartman, and the most recent one, which was Shauna Carroll. Her daughter was given 2 jabs within 3 weeks of each other, fell violently ill, and passed away, and then they mark it as a COVID death. So you get this one particular case, which I imagine that's enough to set off an otherwise rational person for a very long time. Was that the first one that you discovered that set you off, or was that one of the ones that you discovered during your research?
That's the one that caused me to file 8 public records requests, which is the Massachusetts state version of a FOIA. And 7 of them were denied. The one that came through was the entire death certificate database. Now, when I say I have the death certificate database, a certificate is just a piece of paper with a state seal on it. It's got a few things filled out. In the database, for every record, that's every decedent, every dead person, there are 315 different columns on a spreadsheet. So I have the middle names, first names, last names, parents' names, where the parents are from, the manner of death, all the causes, the burial plot. I got everything for everybody.
I guess that is. I never appreciated that that's public information. And so, how many names are on this list? How many entries?
500,000 roughly.
500,000 over 9 years, you said.
Yes.
For my own personal curiosity, what's the apportionment of the 9 years? So the 4
It's
years.
about it's about 59 to 60,000 per year until you get to 2020, in which there were about 8,800 extra deaths in 9 weeks from mid-March to mid-June for the big COVID wave that they called the COVID wave. I could get into what that really was. I interviewed a medical examiner for 3.5 hours who worked in Boston, and we reviewed hundreds of death certificates, and she told me what they were doing during that time. There's a lot I could get into on the COVID stuff. If you want to hit the George Floyd stuff first, it's up to you where you want to go.
Yeah, this might segue us into, this is how you got the information. So you get 9 years of data for Massachusetts. How does it come to be that you get the 9 years of data for Minnesota?
Well, as people talk to each other in our circles, like you said, I know Jessica Rose and a bunch of people, and call it the movement, the truth movement. We just want truth. And somebody pointed me to someone in Minnesota. I contacted that person, and they wanted the analysis that I've done in Massachusetts also done in Minnesota. She has the same not de-identified record, unredacted records that I have. Maybe 150 different columns. There's a few things missing, but still enough. So I'll just say she actually pointed out the George Floyd death certificate to me and said, look at it. Something's funny with it. Look at the UCOD, which means underlying cause of death, which is a terrible name for the root cause of death, the thing that started the causal chain that caused death. Like, this caused not be able to breathe, caused anoxic brain injury, caused death. It's like, what was the root cause, the original cause? And I kind of didn't pay attention because I was so involved in the data that I didn't want to get involved in George Floyd. And then finally I was like, you know what, she's right. And I then understood how the CDC operates, where the states send the written death certificates to the CDC. Or the records, I should say, not certificates, but the database. So the information is in English words that are sent to the CDC, cause A, cause B, cause C, cause D. That's part one of the death certificate. And it's in backwards time order, with A being the immediate cause. Go ahead.
Okay, now question. The CDC is the Center for Disease Control. Why would death certificates go through the CDC as a rule to begin with?
Well, I don't know. I don't think it's a rule that they have to, but the CDC has software called Transax and another program called Acme. And they run it through the Transax Acme software to convert the words. It's not AI, but you can say it's AI. It's understanding the words and converting them into international cause of death codes, ICD-10 codes. And those ICD-10 codes are how everybody in the world tracks causes of death. When they say heart disease is up, they're saying the I4s are up. It's the I is for circulatory system, and 4 is like a lot of cardio stuff. So they're not telling you the cardiac stuff is up. They're telling you anything coded with an I4 is up, is high. And so to apply these codes as the CDC does, it actually creates a single point of failure in a system. I'm a systems engineer, electrical engineer. And so this being a single point of failure, if the CDC has anything wrong, then everything is wrong from there on. So the state sends it to the CDC for coding. The CDC sends it back to the state with the codes applied.
Okay, clarify that. The state, we'll take George Floyd just as the concrete example. He dies. The state sends what to the CDC for coding? Like what is the document form, whatever entry that they send to the CDC?
Yeah. So every state law, all the state laws are different, but most of the states have a law where a death record must be created within, it's like usually 48 hours. So they create a record. Not everything's filled out. I mean, they haven't done the autopsy. They haven't done a lot of stuff. They get the person's name. They get the date and time of death, and the physician attending or the medical examiner. Medical examiners get the bodies usually within 24 hours. So they create the record, and then they start filling it out. When it gets to a certain point, they get the causes of death, they write it, then they send it to the CDC. And what's it? It is a database on a spreadsheet that is in the case of Massachusetts, 315 different columns. It has race, gender, date of birth, date of death, everything in there.
Okay. And now concretely, I keep wanting to say Minnesota. The state is Minnesota. The city's Minneapolis. Minneapolis. What does the state send to the CDC in the initial report of George Floyd's cause of death?
But I can't say definitively. I can just say that whatever was there doesn't seem to be what's there now, because the software will run on what was sent to the CDC originally by Minnesota. And it will look at the last cause listed in part 1 as the UCOD, usually. Now, there are probably something in the algorithm within the TransAct Acme software that pulls something else out. I don't know the details. The manual is online. It's a reference in my book, the TransAct Acme user manual. You can go to the CDC website and find it, or you can buy my book and get the reference.
We're gonna. I haven't put that link in yet, but I will. Is now a good time to bring this up, John?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Now, so this is. You're gonna have to walk us through this, but explain what's going on here. I can zoom in if you would like me to.
Yeah, that's great. Wow,
Okay,
no, you did a great job.
Okay.
So this is not a death certificate. The spreadsheet is 315 columns wide, and I have to drag my fingers across the sheet many times to get to the right column. So what I did is I created this template, and all I do is type in his share file number. For everybody's assigned a unique number, and it populates this visual representation of George Floyd's death certificate.
If I may ask you now, you said, so you created this template. Is that to say you could pull up this template for every one of the entries of the 9 years of data that you have?
Yes.
Okay.
I can type in any one of probably Minnesota has about 420,000 death certificates in the database.
This is, I mean, this stuff makes my head short circuit. This is like creating an Excel spreadsheet that extracts the data, populates it into this predetermined thing. So you have the date of death, the gender or the sex, surname, city, and then you got the ACME, universal cause of, or underlying cause of death, sorry, all this stuff. So you have these, and we're going to show this because you got another one here which with the name blacked out, and we'll get to that in a second. So you get the data, you've created this template to simplify the otherwise non-digestible data in the CDC's database?
Yes, it's just an easier visual representation. It helps me a lot in efficiency of looking through data as well.
Okay, and now we'll go through the obvious stuff here. You got the date of death is May 25th, 2020. Floyd, Minneapolis, X42, ACME, UCOD. This I know is critical. What does that mean?
If you scroll down to the bottom, I can read it.
Okay.
All right, so X42 is accidental poisoning by and exposure to narcotics and psychodyspleptics, hallucinogens, not elsewhere classified.
So they have a specific code for that underlying cause of death.
That actually works for meth. There are acute cocaine overdoses, acute meth overdoses. It works for all of them. It's poisoning by a drug.
If you know this offhand, how many of those do they get in a year in Minnesota?
Well, on this particular one, on the bottom of the right side, it says, there you go, 348 records in Minnesota were the UCOD. 348
in 2020.
In 2020 alone.
Okay.
Yes.
348 were the underlying cause of death was X42, which is accidental poisoning by exposure to narcotics or psychodyspleptics. Don't know what that means. Hallucinogens, not elsewhere classified. Okay. I'm going to come back up. This is where I should come, John?
Sure.
Okay.
So the important thing to look at here is part 1. Part 1 is causes. Part 2 is other significant conditions contributing. A lot of times they put like smoking, obesity, things like that usually go in part 2. If something was in the causal chain of events that cause death, it's usually in part 1. So what you're looking at here is cause A, which is the immediate cause. And this probably should have been broken up to be A, B, C, D. And by the way, for your audience, different states and different people, especially doctors, physicians that are not medical examiners, they do a horrible job. Sometimes they write these things backwards. They're all over the place. So In this case, it was a medical examiner, so it should be right. Cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement subdural restraint and neck compression. Now, cardiopulmonary arrest means his heart stopped and he stopped breathing. And that's if you fall off a building and you die by hitting the ground, your heart stops. But there's no point in putting it on there. It's put on these death certificates because it was something leading up to the heart stopping, and then the heart finally stopped. And the other issue before we go on is that these are counted as heart-related issues. This is when they say heart deaths have increased. I-46, which is what this is, it is on very many death certificates where there was no problem. It's just their heart stopped. The I-469 cardiac arrest unspecified. Yeah. There it is. So that's another thing we can talk about some other time. People spouting data, all the PhDs, MDs, and everybody looking at CDC data, they think they're looking at accurate data that has to do with the heart, but it's not. So let's get back to George Floyd. So they're saying that the neck compression killed him. It was the immediate cause. His heart stopped. That's what did it. That's it. And by the way, he also had in part 2 atherosclerosis.
Arteriosclerotic and hypertensive heart disease, fentanyl intoxication, recent amphetamine use. Does that mean contemporaneous with the death, or does that mean like within the last week?
The latter, more likely. Otherwise, they would have written intoxication, which means it was in his blood at the time.
Which we have with the fentanyl intoxication in the first place right before. Okay.
They also use the word acute very often to describe, like, acute fentanyl intoxication means it happened in the moment. I'm surprised it doesn't say acute here. So, I don't know how they call it the UCOD when it's, first of all, it's in part 2. So the software, Acme and Transact software by the CDC, how did it possibly read this? Now, this is the death certificate as it currently is. How did it, and when I say currently, I mean as of November was the last time I got this database. So how did they get the X42 to be the Acme UCOD from that software if it's in part 2 and part 1 is that he died from the knee on the neck? I mean, the underlying cause of death is the root cause of death. Something, in my opinion, and I don't, you can't know anything for sure unless you dive into the code of the Acme Transacts. But how does the death certificate as it is now represent an X42 as a UCOD? It doesn't. So I believe, and I originally tried to I just wanted to get the information to the defense attorney and get out of it, because I don't want to deal with the George Floyd situation. I have more things. I don't want people shooting arrows at me for this. But the original death certificate, I seriously doubt had that as cause 1. That's also kind of a weird phrase that I've never seen.
And by that as cause 1, you mean cardiopulmonary arrest. See, I'm just trying to make sure I even understand what it says. It sounds like he had a heart attack, which complicated subdual.
It's not a heart attack. That's the problem. Everybody thinks this is a heart attack. All this means is that your heart stopped. That's a cardiac arrest, right? And your heart stopped. That's all it means.
I'll read it this way then. Heart stopped, complicating law enforcement subdual. I don't even read that as heart stopped because of law enforcement subdual, unless I'm reading it wrong.
I know it is not written the way I have ever seen a physician or medical examiner write a death certificate, and I've looked at probably tens of thousands by now.
So now,
after a year and a half.
And to understand this data, this is the template that you've compiled from the data on the CDC that was sent back from the CDC to the state.
That's correct.
So someone hypothetically could say, well, the CDC got the coding, the UCOD wrong, sending it back, and the original recommendation, if, for lack of a better word, would have been suffocation or subdual neck compression. So someone's going to say, how do you know where that error came from? Is it coming from the CDC sending it back with the wrong code, or did someone change it and only change part of it?
Well, that's where a defense attorney really needs to look into this. This is very serious. If the original death certificate from the medical examiner who did the autopsy originally had the fentanyl intoxication as the root cause of death, and then somebody changed it after it went back to the state in order to meet a narrative they're trying to push on the people, that really needs to be looked into by a defense attorney. Just the fact that X42 is there, it's still there, and they haven't fixed it to match what the words say. See, the X42 on this same record as cause A, they don't match. And
now typically they would match.
Yeah, I mean, go to the right and let's see that other one. Right.
So now to explain what we have here, this is another individual who died, and it's the underlying cause of death is the same as George Floyd. This is the same year, so we got different city certifiers. Okay.
So this is the only one out of the only other one out of the 348 that does not have in the written cause A, B, C, D fentanyl overdose. So this is like George Floyd's in that it is an aberration, and 348 records. I looked through every single one of them, and every single one has fentanyl intoxication as the last cause.
I'm just comparing. You got fentanyl intoxication for both of these in part 2.
In part 2, yep. These are that's the only one. I only found this yesterday, David.
The only other one in the of the 348 that has UCOD X42 without it being in the part 1 cause of death. What does foreign body aspirate? I mean, I know what it means, but does that mean choking?
It could, yeah. Yes. Yeah, he aspirated something that's not supposed to be in your lungs into his lungs. Okay. Maybe he breathed in well, I don't want to speculate.
No, I mean, I could just imagine maybe, I don't know if that would be the same description for choking on your vomit as an OD, for example, but.
Yeah, they usually write that.
And then we got here injury description, injected illicit drugs. And if we go to injury description, decedent experienced a cardiopulmonary arrest while being restrained by law enforcement officers. So 348 all have X42, and they are demonstrable X42s. And that's
yeah,
that has that as the number 1 cause of death in the description.
I don't know if you loaded the other pages, but the other pages. Oh, you did? Wow.
Yeah, here we go. Okay.
All right.
I'm going to bring it out. Hold on, like this.
There you go.
Okay. Okay, now tell us what's going on here.
So what you're looking at, well, I just wanted to show you that there's not an ME listed on George Floyd's record. I don't know why. It says medical examiner case. Why does it not say medical examiner case? Was that removed? Why is the medical examiner not signing up for having written this death certificate? You would think that the seriousness of the case, somebody would put their name to it, right? Put their profession to it.
Can I scroll up to the top? Who do we see up here as the certificate surname? What does this mean? Baker
his last name is Baker.
Oh, okay. It wasn't.
He doesn't bake donuts, no.
Okay, so that's not no, but I thought that was maybe the certifier of the city. So
yeah, he is the, now it doesn't say there. I could look it up actually, whether or not he's a medical examiner or a physician attending or a nurse practitioner.
Okay. And so this data that we're seeing here is compiled from George Floyd's data from the CDC.
Every line is a different person. These are records of every different person where you see on that line, cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement, subdual, restraint, neck compression. That's George Floyd where the arrow is. Okay. If you go to the next slide, I'll show you something. Okay, so this is cause A, cause B, cause C. What's in red is where it says fentanyl. Now, because remember I said the UCOD is the last one listed. So if there's only something listed in A, then that's the last one. And all of those that are in red with the red bar under A on the left, those all say either fentanyl or meth or something like that. The red squares, the 3 red squares to the right, you see 2 of them are in cause B, and it says fentanyl. That's the last one listed. Mm-hmm. And then you go out to C, there's one there, the last cause listed, fentanyl toxicity. So I'm showing you that every one of those other 348 records are correct in that the UCOD is the last cause listed on the death record. And on the screen right now, there are probably 10, 20, 30, there's over 30 people listed out of the 348. I didn't want to, and there's the next screen. I'm not going to give you the whole 348, but all of these were in cause A, which was the last one listed. So the software was working fine. I think somebody intervened in the software and changed something. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. And this has this been mentioned publicly yet?
Not really, no. No, it's only there were probably 4 or 5 of us who knew this for the last month. I tried to contact a very well-known doctor. I didn't understand what side of the case he was on, so we had a confusing conversation at first, and then we figured it out. It's like, all right, we shouldn't talk. And then I just want the truth to go to the defense attorney, because everybody's got their opinions. The worst this was involuntary manslaughter, because Floyd was in the care of the officer who had a legal duty to act and determine his status. That's the worst it could be, is involuntary manslaughter. I don't see how it can be anything else.
Yeah, I'm just Googling right now. I think Derek Chauvin is now pro se. I think he's representing himself.
Yeah, I read that.
So I don't even think he's got an attorney anymore. So that's, and what can be done to obtain, in as much as it could potentially exist, the original data information sent from the state to the CDC, which would confirm or contradict what the CDC sent back to the state?
I mean, you know the law better than I do, but if I were Chauvin, or his attorney, I would ask the state for the evidence. I mean, it's number one, it's Brady evidence, right? And secondly, he should be able to get it on a state FOIA. And then thirdly, he should get it on a federal FOIA, because the record was in the hands of the CDC, which is a federal entity. So the chain of custody of that death certificate and the original one written and every version of it should be obtained by defense counsel.
You've got more time, right? If we're going to go over to Rumble, and then I'll keep you there, and we'll start talking a bit about some of the COVID stuff for a bit. You got a little bit more time?
Absolutely.
Okay, so, and that does it for Chauvin. I mean, these are the questions. This is the data, and there's something that doesn't make sense that needs to be made sense of, if it means nothing more than cramming what is it, a square peg into a circle hole, or is it a circle peg into a square hole? There's information that requires clarification, because the underlying cause of death code coming back from the CDC does not match the conviction information and the other data on the CDC's info space place. That was one heck of a way of saying database. Okay, what we're going to do now, everybody, just give us 2 seconds. I'm going to give everyone the link. So you come on over to Rumble, because also I'm not scared of YouTube, but they might not like some of the stuff that you're going to tell us, which I might snip and clip and stick out there anyhow. Get on over to Rumble, and we're going to end on YouTube. Or go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com for those of you who might not be able to access Rumble if you happen to be in France. And I saw that chat from earlier on. Go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com. We're streaming there as well now. So one thing's for certain, we're ending on YouTube. So Rumble or Locals, see you there.